And Julia Gillard's management of this minority parliament has been remarkable on many fronts. Not only has the government survived the 3 years, many critics said that could never happen, but as of last night, this hung parliament has passed 559 bills. Tony Windsor is one of the key independents who have helped keep Labor in power. The job's not quite over. Parliament has 7 more days to run, with more than 100 bills still to be dealt with. Tony Windsor's in our Parliament House studio. Tony Windsor, good morning.
Good morning, Fran.
With 7 sitting days left, all those bills you wouldn't think could get through. What should the government be prioritising?
Well, the Gonski education reforms, obviously, and an issue that I've been working on for about 7 years now, the water trigger in the Senate in terms of the environmental legislation. That's being debated, was yesterday, and hopefully will be again today. So there's probably only 3 or 4 major items, and then there's a lot of other issues that are out there. But those 2 are the biggest that I'd see anyway.
Are you critical of this government for the fact that we are in the last 7 sitting days of this parliament and the Gonski bill is not negotiated yet, but not through yet? Are you critical of that management?
Oh, not really. It could have been done earlier. Of course, obviously, the Prime Minister and the Minister have had difficulties with the states. So there's probably a bit of constructed push towards the end as well in terms of trying to get the states to come over the line. And I think there'll probably be, by the end of June, there'll probably be 4 or 5 states involved. But I think the important thing, whether it could have been done 3 weeks ago or is done in 2 weeks' time, the important thing to me, and it goes to your question with Paul, if there was some push in terms of leadership, it would be a great shame and a tragedy for education, particularly in regional Australia, if in fact we had a circumstance where the Gonski reforms fell over because the people in the Labor Party couldn't agree with each other.
There's been a lot of criticism of the minority parliament from both major parties. Last year, Labor MP Joel Fitzgibbon famously said that the hung parliament is killing us, talking about the Labor Party. What's your take on the value of this minority parliament?
Well, I think Joel's comments are nonsense. We've worked with Joel and others. If you've got your own internal difficulties, then the leadership has been a difficulty right from the start of this parliament. Obviously, in politics, you try and find someone else to blame, and I think that's what Joel would have done in that circumstance. I think a lot of people at the start of this particular parliament thought nothing would be done. The numbers are going to be so tenuous that nothing will be done. In fact, there's probably 6 pieces, significant pieces of legislation, long-term issues that have been addressed, some of which, the Murray-Darling, for instance, haven't been addressed by majority governments for 100 years. So I don't think you can go out there and say this is all because of the independents. The Labor leadership issues have been because of Labor people. And some very effective opposition, Mr. No, Tony Abbott, of course. But so to blame the independents, I think, is just bringing a furphy into the debate.
Well, you also have critics who say you've not been independent enough. Let's just have a listen to fellow crossbencher Bob Catter on Sky News yesterday.
I don't think it was a hung parliament. I think there were 2 independents there that, as far as I can make out, were part of the Labor Party machine. I don't know of any issue which they stood separate from the Labor Party. So it wasn't a hung parliament at all.
That was Bob Catter on Sky Agenda, actually, and basically saying that you and Rob Oakeshott were de facto Labor MPs. Have you pushed this government hard enough? If you had your time again, would you go harder?
Well, Bob missed the opportunity to be involved in a hung parliament. He sort of walked away when the gunfire started, and now he wants to create another hung parliament in his own image in another period. He's missed a chance, and I think he's recognised that there's been an enormous amount of focus on regional Australia in this particular parliament. I could go through them all again. Nearly $2 billion in terms of regional health, 134 hospitals and health services in regional Australia, the Education Investment Fund, a whole range of regional programs that Simon Crean has custody of, some of the infrastructure programs, etc. So I don't think anybody can deny, and I don't think Bob would either, because he's been the beneficiary of some of them, that the Parliament hasn't focused on regional Australia. Probably the first Parliament. This is the first Parliament that's had a regional Australia committee, for instance. A lot of talk about regional Australia by politicians, but very little's done because they've been taken for granted in the past. In terms of your political question, though, I made it very plain, and I learnt this in another hung parliament many, many years ago, and I remember saying to Rob Oakeshott and others, the last thing you want to do in a hung parliament is try and become the government. You know, you're only one voice. No one gave it. The numbers have fallen the way they have because of the way the people voted. So you become a participant of the process, not become the government. I think that's where Bob would like to be if he can get someone in the Senate who wanted to become the government. Well, there's a few others want to become the government too. I don't, and I never have wanted to do that. So
well,
most of the negotiating, and Julia Gillard, to her credit, has been able to do that. Most of the negotiating has taken place outside the parliamentary chamber. Now, it would have been lovely for Tony Abbott and some of the commentators to have every argument and brawl over pieces of legislation take place out in the open air, so that they could see that there was even more disunity or chaos. Now, quiet negotiation. You know, I can remember with some of the what was called FOFA, the Future of Financial Administration. That took about 5 months with Bill Shorten. Not a lot seen on the television screens or in the paper, but you know, quite lengthy negotiation on those sorts of issues. And that's what a hung parliament is really about. It's not the theatre we see in Question Time. It's really about can business be done when you have a minority in government.
You're listening to RM Breakfast. It's 11 minutes to 8. Our guest this morning is the independent member for New England, Tony Windsor. Tony Windsor, talking about the theatre of disunity and chaos, there's plenty of that on display at the moment within Labor, about the Labor leadership. You touched on it before. You know, odds. No one seems to know what the odds are of a change of leadership or not, but it is being debated, as you can hear, around the place, and I'm sure you've heard it. If Labor switched leaders, do you think Tony Abbott would move a motion of no confidence, and have you thought through what you would do at that point?
Well, I haven't thought it through because I don't think he will, because he hasn't. We've had this threat of a no confidence motion week in, week out. Nothing's ever happened, and I think that's because he would have lost votes rather than gained them. But anyway, you don't know what the market says until you go to the shops. But
let me ask you that another way. If Labor changed leaders, would Kevin Rudd have your confidence as Prime Minister?
In a theoretical sense, and that's where you want me to go, if it was done this week or next week, it gives Tony Abbott the opportunity to run a no-confidence motion into the Parliament. So why would you do it then? If you're going to do it, why wouldn't you do it after the Parliament had rose, where whoever he is, whether it's Rudd or someone else, became the leader? They'd be doing it in the open air. They'd be leader, and then they'd be automatically Prime Minister. And they do it during these 2 weeks. Obviously, there's a risk side that Abbott would move a no-confidence motion, even though he's been reluctant to do that. If he did and he won, he could go into the election as Prime Minister and Rudd as opposition leader. So would Rudd want to do that? Or, I doubt it. I think the whole thing's a bit of a dust storm, really. I think we'll see the same Prime Minister at the end of next week as we've got today.
Tony Windsor, thank you very much for joining us.
Okay, thanks, Fran.